The restaurant smelled of sizzling steak and freshly baked bread, a soft hum of chatter filling the air. It was an upscale place, with dim golden lighting and elegant chandeliers hanging above each table. A violinist played in the corner, adding a romantic ambience. Sophie sat at the table near the window, tapping her manicured fingers impatiently against the polished wooden surface. She had been waiting for this day for months, the day she would finally meet the man who had turned her world upside down with his words. Michael. They had met on Facebook. Or rather, he had found her, sending a polite message, which she had ignored at first. But his persistence, intelligence, and kind words had drawn her in. Their conversations had stretched into the late hours of the night, his voice soothing her when she had bad days. And more than anything, he had helped her. Whenever she was broke, Michael was there. He sent money without hesitation, paid for her hair appointments, settled her rent when she struggled, and even sent extra for emergencies. Sophie had never met a man like him, and now she was finally going to see him in person. She glanced at her younger sister, Olivia, who sat across from her, stirring a glass of juice with a straw. Olivia had tagged along reluctantly, saying she wanted to see the man her sister had been raving about. "You're too excited," Olivia teased, watching Sophie fix her lipstick in the small mirror from her purse. Sophie smirked. "Why wouldn't I be? He's successful, smart, and rich. He's probably tall and handsome too." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "And what if he isn't?" Sophie scoffed. "Come on, Olivia. A man who can afford this restaurant must be well put together. Besides, I've seen his profile picture. He looks decent." Olivia shook her head but said nothing. Minutes passed. Then, Sophie's phone vibrated on the table. She snatched it up instantly. "Michael, I just arrived. I'm coming inside now." Sophie's heart pounded with excitement. She straightened in her seat, smoothing the fabric of her red gown. Then, the doors to the restaurant swung open. She searched for a tall, confident man in a sleek suit, but instead, something else caught her attention. A man in a wheelchair. He rolled in smoothly, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, his dark eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. Sophie frowned. No, this couldn't be him. But then, the man smiled and lifted a hand in greeting. It was Michael. Her stomach twisted. The sound of his wheelchair wheels against the marble floor seemed louder than anything else in the restaurant. The conversations around her faded as her brain tried to process what was happening. Michael rolled up to the table, his face bright with excitement. "Sophie," he said warmly, "it's so good to finally meet you." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She had imagined many scenarios for their first meeting, but never this. "You." Her voice cracked. "You're crippled?" Michael's expression faltered slightly, but he kept his smile. "Yes. I've been in a wheelchair for a while now." Sophie's body went rigid. "You never told me." "I didn't think it mattered," Michael said gently. "I wanted you to know me for who I am, not for my condition." Sophie's face twisted with shock and growing anger. "You didn't think it mattered?" she repeated, her voice rising. "How could you hide something like this from me? You let me believe." She stopped herself, shaking her head. Michael's smile faded completely now. "Sophie, I never lied to you. I never said I wasn't in a wheelchair. But you didn't tell me either." Sophie snapped. "Do you know how humiliating this is? I've been talking about you to my friends, telling them about this amazing guy, and now?" Her voice broke again as she gestured towards his wheelchair. Michael's hands tightened on the wheels of his chair. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of pain in his eyes. "Sophie," Olivia interjected, her voice soft but firm. "That's enough." But Sophie wasn't done. "How could you deceive me like this?" she continued, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you think I would ever date a man in a wheelchair?" The words cut through the air like a blade. A few heads turned in the restaurant, curious glances thrown their way. Michael inhaled deeply, then exhaled. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was undeniable sadness in it. "I see," he said simply. Sophie scoffed, grabbing her purse. "I can't believe I wasted my time coming here. You should have been honest from the start." She shoved her chair back and stood, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Olivia, still seated, stared at her sister in disbelief. Sophie, you're being cruel. Sophie ignored her. Without sparing Michael another glance, she turned and stormed towards the exit. Michael sat there, unmoving, his expression unreadable. Olivia hesitated for a moment before standing as well. She looked at Michael, her heart aching at the pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, before hurrying after her sister. But as she walked out of the restaurant, something inside her twisted with regret. She didn't know why, but she couldn't get Michael out of her mind. The taxi ride home was filled with tense silence. Sophie sat with her arms crossed, her face set in a deep scowl as she stared out the window. Olivia, sitting beside her, kept stealing glances at her sister, her heart pounding with disbelief at what had just happened. "You didn't have to be so harsh," Olivia finally said, breaking the silence. Sophie scoffed, shaking her head. "Don't start, Olivia. I did nothing wrong. You humiliated him." Olivia shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Right there in front of everyone. He didn't deserve that." Sophie turned to face her, her eyes flashing. "Are you seriously defending him?" "Olivia, he lied to me." "He didn't lie." Olivia's voice was quieter now, but firm. "He just didn't tell you everything because he wanted you to see him for who he is. And the way you treated him," she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "It was cruel." Sophie rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." The rest of the ride continued in silence. When they arrived home, Sophie stomped inside, heading straight to her bedroom and slamming the door shut. Olivia lingered in the living room, still unsettled. She couldn't get the image of Michael out of her mind. The way his face had fallen, the sadness in his eyes. He had been nothing but kind, and yet her sister had treated him like dirt. Something in her heart told her it wasn't fair. And she wasn't the type of person to ignore her conscience. With quiet determination, Olivia pulled out her phone, found Michael's number in Sophie's contacts, and quickly copied it down. She hesitated for a moment. Was she really about to do this? Yes. Taking a deep breath, she dialed the number. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Hello?" His voice was calm, but there was something exhausted about it, as if he had been through an emotional storm. Olivia swallowed the lump in her throat. "Michael, this is Olivia, Sophie's sister." There was a brief pause. "Oh." She rushed on before he could say anything else. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. My sister was wrong. She shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Another pause. Then, a soft chuckle. "You don't have to apologize for your sister's actions, Olivia." "But I want to," she insisted, "because I feel terrible about what happened. You didn't deserve that." A moment of silence passed between them, then Michael sighed. "Thank you. That means a lot." There was something about the warmth in his voice that made Olivia feel lighter. She bit her lip before speaking again. "I don't know if this is overstepping, but would you like some company?" Michael hesitated. "You mean now?" "Not right now," Olivia said quickly, laughing nervously. "But maybe tomorrow? I don't know. I just feel like, after everything that happened, you deserve a friend." Michael was quiet for a while. Then, softly, he said, "All right, I'd like that." And just like that, a new chapter began. One neither of them had seen coming. The next afternoon, Olivia stood outside a massive white mansion, staring in awe. Michael had sent her the address that morning, and she had assumed he lived in an ordinary house, maybe an apartment. But this? It was breathtaking. The gates opened automatically as she approached, and she walked up the stone-paved driveway, her heart thumping in her chest. A uniformed maid opened the front door and led her inside. The interior was even more impressive. Marble floors, a grand staircase, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a lush green garden. And then, there he was. Michael sat in his wheelchair near the large glass doors, wearing a simple but elegant sweater and dark trousers. His face broke into a smile as he saw her. "You actually came," he said. "Of course I did." Olivia smiled, setting down the basket she had brought. "I figured since this is the first time we're hanging out, I'd bring lunch." Michael raised an amused eyebrow. "You cook?" She grinned. "You're about to find out." For the next hour, Olivia bustled around the kitchen, preparing a simple but delicious meal of fried rice, chicken, and plantains. Michael watched her with interest, occasionally making small conversation. "You seem different from your sister," he remarked at one point. Olivia glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "You're kinder. More thoughtful." He shrugged. "More genuine." Olivia laughed. "Well, I like to think I was raised right." Michael chuckled but said nothing. When they finally sat down to eat, Michael took a bite and let out a low groan of satisfaction. "Okay, I officially approve of you." Olivia burst into laughter. "Good to know." The rest of the meal passed with light-hearted conversation, laughter, and the easy comfort of two people getting to know each other. And somewhere in the back of Olivia's mind, a thought whispered, this was only the beginning. Days passed, then weeks. Olivia and Michael's friendship grew stronger. She visited him often, bringing him food, keeping him company, laughing with him. He told her about his work, his travels, his dreams. She found herself genuinely enjoying his company, her initial guilt turning into something deeper. Respect, admiration, something else she couldn't name. But then, one evening, everything changed. Olivia had just finished showering when she heard her phone ringing in the living room. She quickly threw on a dress and stepped out, only to freeze at the sight before her. Sophie stood there, holding Olivia's phone in her hands, her face twisted with rage. "Why is Michael calling you?" Sophie demanded. Olivia's heart dropped. "Sophie, give me my phone." Sophie held it up mockingly. "You've been talking to him behind my back?" Olivia took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's not like that." "Not like that?" Sophie threw the phone onto the couch. "You're chatting with a crippled man? Olivia, have you lost your mind?" Anger flared inside Olivia. "Don't talk about him like that." Sophie's eyes widened at her sister's defiance. "You're seriously defending him? Are you falling for him?" Olivia didn't answer. Sophie laughed bitterly. "Wow, you really are pathetic." Olivia clenched her fists. "You know what's pathetic? You're so shallow that you threw away a good man just because of his wheelchair. And now you're angry that someone else appreciates him?" Sophie glared at her. "Get out of my house." Olivia's breath hitched. "What?" "You heard me," Sophie spat. "If you want to side with him, then leave." Tears burned Olivia's eyes, but she lifted her chin. "Fine." She turned, grabbed her bag, and walked out without looking back. And when she reached the street, the only place she could think to go was Michael's house. The night air was cold as Olivia stood outside Michael's mansion, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The weight of what had just happened with Sophie pressed heavily on her chest, but she refused to cry. Not for Sophie. Not for the home she had just been thrown out of. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Moments later, the door swung open, and Michael's butler, an elderly man with kind eyes, greeted her. "Miss Olivia," he said with a slight bow. "You're here late. Is everything all right?" Olivia hesitated. Was she making a mistake? Should she have tried harder to fix things with Sophie? Before she could second-guess herself, Michael's voice called out from inside. "Who is it, Thomas?" "It's Miss Olivia, sir." There was silence, then the sound of wheels rolling over marble floors. A moment later, Michael appeared in the doorway, his dark eyes scanning her face. "Olivia?" His voice was soft, concerned. "What's wrong?" And just like that, the dam broke. A single tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, "She kicked me out." Michael's expression darkened. "Sophie?" Olivia nodded, unable to trust her voice. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his jaw tightening as if he were holding back words. Then, without another question, he moved his wheelchair back and gestured toward the house. "Come in." Something about the simple invitation made Olivia's throat tighten even more. She stepped inside, and for the first time since she had left Sophie's house, she felt safe. Michael led Olivia to the living room, where the fireplace cast a warm glow against the high ceilings. She sat on the couch, curling her legs beneath her, while Michael positioned himself across from her. "Tell me everything," he said softly. So she did. She told him about the moment Sophie found out, the horrible words she had thrown at her, and how she had been kicked out like a stranger instead of a sister. Michael listened in silence, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest of his wheelchair. When she finished, he let out a slow breath. "You don't deserve this," he finally said. Olivia let out a bitter chuckle. "Tell that to my sister." Michael's expression hardened. "She'll regret it." Olivia sighed and leaned back against the couch. "Maybe, but I don't want to think about her right now." She looked at him hesitantly. "Michael, I don't know where else to go." "You don't have to go anywhere," he said immediately. "You can stay here for as long as you want." Olivia's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" Michael nodded. "Of course. You've been there for me when I needed someone. Let me do the same for you." Her throat tightened at his kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. Michael smiled softly. "Anytime." For the first time that night, Olivia felt like she wasn't alone. Days turned into weeks. Living with Michael was easy. Every morning, Olivia helped the house staff prepare breakfast. She and Michael would eat together, talking and laughing over meals. She spent her afternoons reading in the grand library or strolling through the gardens. Some nights, they watched movies, arguing playfully over which ones were the best. And somewhere in between those moments, Olivia felt something shift inside her. One evening, they sat on the balcony, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, the cool breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Michael turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you still here?" Olivia blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could have left. You could have found another place to stay, gotten your own apartment, but you didn't." He studied her carefully. "Why?" Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Why hadn't she left? Because being here with Michael felt right. Because his presence made her feel seen in a way she never had before. Because, deep down, she didn't want to leave. She swallowed hard and gave him the only answer she could. "Because I feel at home here." Michael didn't say anything, but something flickered in his eyes. Something warm and unreadable. And for the first time, Olivia wondered if maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. Michael tried to ignore it. The way his heart stuttered when Olivia laughed. The way his skin tingled whenever her hand brushed against his. The way he caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking. It wasn't supposed to happen. He had started this whole thing as a test, an experiment to see if someone could love him for who he was. And yet, in the process, he had found something he hadn't been looking for. He had found her. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Olivia turned to him, her brown eyes shining in the dim light. "Michael," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Do you ever regret being like this?" She gestured to his wheelchair. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "Not anymore." Olivia frowned. "Why not?" "Because if I wasn't," he said, "I never would have met you." Silence filled the air. Then, without thinking, Olivia reached out and took his hand. Michael looked at her, his breath catching. And in that moment, he knew this was real. This was love. Months passed. Michael and Olivia's love story unfolded in a way neither of them had expected. Despite her parents' protests, Olivia stood firm. She loved Michael, and nothing was going to change that. The wedding was set. It was grand, beautiful, perfect. "Sophie, of course," mocked Olivia relentlessly. "You're really marrying a crippled man," she sneered. "You're throwing your life away." But Olivia only smiled. "You'll see," she said simply. And then, the wedding day arrived. The ceremony was breathtaking. The church was filled with flowers, guests from all over the country arriving to celebrate the union. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The priest turned to Michael. "You may kiss your bride." Michael looked at Olivia, love shining in his eyes. Then, slowly, he stood up. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Sophie's mouth fell open. Olivia's heart pounded. Michael took Olivia's hands, his voice steady. "I was never crippled," he said softly. Olivia's breath hitched. "What?" "I did this to test you, to see if you'd love me for who I am, not what I look like or what I can offer." He swallowed. "And you did." Tears slipped down Olivia's cheeks. Michael cupped her face. "I love you, Olivia." She let out a choked laugh. "You're unbelievable." And then, as the crowd erupted into cheers, she kissed him. Sophie, standing at the back, watched in stunned silence. And for the first time, she realized she had lost everything. Sophie stood frozen at the back of the church, her entire body trembling as she watched Michael rise from his wheelchair. The reality of what had just happened crashed over her like a wave. He wasn't crippled. He never had been. The man she had mocked, insulted, and pushed away was never helpless. He was powerful, wealthy, and deeply in love with her sister. Sophie felt her knees weaken. She had spent months laughing at Olivia, taunting her, calling her foolish for choosing a man in a wheelchair. And yet, here he was, standing, strong and confident, proving her wrong. The applause of the guests felt like a slap to her face. She looked at Olivia. Her younger sister stood in her white gown, tears shining in her eyes as she wrapped her arms around Michael's neck, whispering something only he could hear. They looked so happy. A deep, sharp pain twisted inside Sophie's chest. This could have been her moment. It was her that Michael had first loved. It was her he had wanted, supported, and cared for. But she had thrown it all away. For what? For pride? For shallow judgments? For a fleeting moment of superiority? Her fingers dug into her dress as guilt and regret choked her. For the first time in her life, Sophie realized just how blind she had been. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced them back. It was too late. There was nothing she could do now. She had lost. Sophie sat alone in the reception hall, staring blankly at her untouched glass of wine. Laughter and music filled the air, but she barely heard any of it. All she could see was them. Michael and Olivia stood together on the dance floor, their bodies swaying slowly to the soft melody of the song. Olivia's head rested on his chest, and Michael held her close as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Sophie swallowed the lump in her throat. "This isn't fair," she muttered under her breath. "You did this to yourself." Sophie turned sharply at the voice. Her mother stood beside her, her expression unreadable. Sophie scoffed. "Oh, so now you're going to tell me how terrible I am?" Their mother sighed, sitting down beside her. "No, I think you already know that." Sophie tensed. "Tell me, Sophie," her mother continued softly. "If you had known he wasn't crippled, would you have treated him differently?" The question sent a sharp pain through Sophie's heart. Yes, she would have. She wouldn't have insulted him. She wouldn't have walked out of that restaurant. She wouldn't have mocked Olivia for loving him. She would have wanted him. And that realization made her stomach twist. She had judged him not by his heart, not by his kindness, not by his love, but by his legs. Her mother watched her carefully. "You don't have to say anything. I already know the answer." Sophie clenched her jaw. "So what? Are you going to lecture me?" "No," her mother said gently. "I just want you to understand that life isn't about appearances. It's about what's inside a person. You let a good man slip through your fingers because of your pride." Sophie's chest tightened. "Olivia saw what you couldn't," her mother continued. "She saw Michael's soul. And that's why she's happy right now, while you're sitting here alone." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her mother sighed and stood up. "I hope one day you'll learn from this. Until then, I pray you find peace." And with that, she walked away, leaving Sophie to drown in the weight of her own regret. The moon was high in the sky when Olivia and Michael finally returned home. Olivia couldn't stop smiling. The wedding had been everything she had ever dreamed of. The flowers, the music, the love in the air. It was perfect, but nothing compared to this moment. She stood in the middle of their bedroom, still in her wedding dress, staring at the man she had just married. Michael walked toward her, his eyes filled with something so deep, so intense, it made her heart ache. "You're really my wife now," he murmured, reaching out to tuck a loose curl behind her ear. She smiled softly. "And you're really my husband." His fingers traced her cheek. "Are you mad at me? For what I did?" Olivia let out a small laugh. "For pretending to be crippled?" Michael's jaw tensed. "I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to be sure. I needed to know if someone could love me for me." Olivia stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. Michael, you don't have to explain. I understand. His eyes searched hers. You do? She nodded. If I had known the truth from the beginning, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I would have seen you the way Sophie did. Someone powerful, someone rich. Maybe I wouldn't have fallen for your heart first. She smiled. But now, I know I did. And I don't regret a single moment of it. Michael let out a shaky breath. I don't deserve you. Olivia tilted her head. That's where you're wrong. Michael stared at her for a long moment. Then without another word, he pulled her into his arms and held her close. I love you, Olivia, he whispered into her hair. She smiled against his chest. I love you too, Michael. And in that moment, they both knew. This was forever. Weeks passed. Sophie's bitterness did not fade overnight. She watched from a distance as Olivia and Michael built a life together. A life filled with love, happiness, and all the things Sophie had once taken for granted. And the more she watched, the more she realized something painful. It wasn't that Michael had tested Olivia. It wasn't even that he had lied about being crippled. The truth was, even if he had been truly disabled, Olivia still would have been the luckiest woman alive. Because Michael's love was real. His kindness was real. And Sophie had thrown it away. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, she picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Her finger hovered over Olivia's name. She hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she pressed call. The phone rang. Once, twice, then, hello? Olivia's voice was soft, uncertain. Sophie swallowed hard. Olivia, it's me. A long pause. Then, cautiously, Sophie? Sophie closed her eyes, fighting back tears. I'm sorry. Silence. Then Olivia sighed. I was waiting for you to say that. Sophie's throat tightened. Can we talk? She asked hesitantly. A small smile played in Olivia's voice. Of course, Sophie. And for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change. Maybe, just maybe, she could start over. Sophie sat in a quiet cafe, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't seen Olivia since the wedding, and now, waiting for her felt like an eternity. She had rehearsed what to say 1,000 times. But now, sitting here, she wasn't sure where to begin. Would Olivia still be angry? Would she even listen? The door to the cafe opened, and Sophie looked up. There she was, Olivia. She looked radiant, happier than Sophie had ever seen her. Her skin glowed, her eyes sparkled, and there was a calmness about her that Sophie could not ignore. And suddenly, Sophie felt smaller than she ever had before. Hi, Olivia said as she took a seat across from her. Sophie swallowed hard. Hi. A moment of silence passed between them. Then, Olivia spoke softly. I wasn't sure you would actually call me. Sophie looked down at her hands. I wasn't sure either. Olivia sighed and leaned forward. Sophie, what do you want to say? Sophie closed her eyes for a brief second, then exhaled. I was wrong, Olivia. About everything. Olivia didn't say anything. She just listened. I judged Michael unfairly, Sophie admitted, her voice shaking. I was shallow, selfish, and cruel. I don't even know who I was back then. But seeing you at the wedding, seeing how happy you were, it made me realize I lost something precious because of my pride. Olivia's eyes softened, but she remained quiet. Sophie took a shaky breath. I can't take back what I did, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I am sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. For the first time since their falling out, Olivia smiled. Sophie, she said gently, I forgave you a long time ago. Sophie's breath hitched. You did? Olivia nodded. Holding on to hate wouldn't have done me any good. But I was waiting for you to realize it yourself. Tears pooled in Sophie's eyes. I don't deserve this. Olivia reached across the table and took Sophie's hand. You're my sister. No matter what happened, you'll always be my sister. A choked sob escaped Sophie's lips. I've missed you, Olivia. I've missed you too. And just like that, the ice between them melted. They sat there for hours, talking about everything and nothing. And for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt something she thought she had lost forever: peace. Life after reconciliation was different for Sophie. She still carried regret, but she was learning to forgive herself. Michael, surprisingly, was kind to her. Though he never brought up the past, his warmth and generosity made her feel even worse for the way she had treated him. One afternoon, while visiting Olivia's new home, Sophie found herself alone in the garden with Michael. "I never thanked you," she said suddenly. Michael looked at her with curiosity. "For what?" "For everything you did for me before," she sighed. "Before I ruined it." Michael chuckled. "Well, I won't lie, Sophie. It hurt. But in the end, I think everything happened the way it was meant to." Sophie looked away. "I still feel like I don't deserve your kindness." Michael shrugged. "Maybe, but people change. And from what I see, you're trying." Sophie met his gaze, searching for any trace of resentment. There was none. He had truly let it go. And that, more than anything, made her want to be a better person. "Thank you," she whispered. Michael smiled. "You're welcome." Months passed, and Sophie focused on rebuilding herself. She found a new job, surrounded herself with positive influences, and learned to appreciate people beyond their outward appearance. But love was something she had given up on. Until one day, she met Nathan. Nathan was nothing like Michael. He wasn't rich, powerful, or mysterious. He was simple, hardworking, and kind. He was patient with Sophie, never pushing her but always showing her what true love was supposed to be, unconditional. When he proposed a year later, Sophie cried, not because she was afraid, but because she finally understood what Olivia had found in Michael. Love wasn't about status. It wasn't about perfection. It was about acceptance, patience, and seeing beyond what the eyes could perceive. And this time, Sophie wasn't going to make the same mistake. 2 years after Olivia and Michael's wedding, another wedding took place. This time, it was Sophie's. As she stood at the altar, staring into Nathan's eyes, she felt something she never thought she would again. Pure, unfiltered happiness. Olivia was by her side as her maid of honor, smiling with pride. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Sophie felt a tear slip down her cheek. Not out of sadness, not out of regret, but out of gratitude. She had lost once, but life had given her a second chance, and this time, she wasn't letting go. Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed our stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.